Okay guys, this is Mike again with Prep a Pizza. Today in this episode, I'm gonna talk about what are some of the things you can do with leftover dough. So for example, if you happen to have any of these laying around your house, normal bread pan, a glass bread pan, or even a fancy Benetton basket, or just some parchment paper, you can make some amazing bread when you have leftover pizza dough. I'm gonna show you how right now. What we're going to do is we're actually gonna use this Benetton basket today for what I'm doing. However, I'm gonna show you on the parchment paper what you can do, so that way if you only had parchment paper, if you have one of these types things, whether it's this kind of bread dish or a glass dish, you want to make sure that when you put the dough in it after you're ready, that it's nice and greased up. So you could use olive oil to do that, you could use butter, just kind of all depends on the taste and flavor that you're going to want at the end. The way I'm doing it is in the basket here, just because one, I like the way that it looks after it's done, and two, it's pretty easy to do. First things first, I'm going to show you what to do with the basket, and what you're going to need is actually some rice flour and something to sift the rice flour in, which is very simple to do. You just simply take that, go around your basket with it. You want to just put a generous amount around the basket, making sure that you cover it, because what you're doing is you're actually, with this rice flour, you're creating a non-stick surface for your bread to sit on top of. That way it doesn't stick to the basket, and then you're able to make a loaf of bread later. You can be pretty generous with this. Rice flour doesn't really have any added flavor that it's going to add to the dough. And in fact, you see a lot of breads where they kind of have a white top to it, and that's rice flour typically from a basket. Once you get this nice and coated all over, the next thing is you're going to want to put your dough balls together for bread. You can do this a couple of different ways. If you wanted to make a couple of different breads out of each individual dough ball, you could. Just remember they're going to be smaller. So if you want to make something like the size of this basket here, realistically 2 to 3 dough balls is going to be adequate for the basket. 3 will obviously help you build a larger loaf, but 2 will work fine and you'll create a really nice loaf of bread too. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a dough knife, a scraper, and we're going to scrape a couple of these dough balls out to make our stuff. If you have semolina left over, or if you went and bought some from the store, that's up to you. You can actually just put some semolina on there to kind of help you get them out of the box. And also it'll kind of help you with stretching them a little bit. Just a little bit of semolina. I'm gonna use 3 dough balls. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it on the parchment here, so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing with it. Okay, so on the parchment here, I got 1, 2, and 3. Now the good news is they don't really have to be like any kind of uniform way, because you're about to basically stretch them into one big dough ball. What you're gonna do is just simply use a little bit of semolina for your hands. You know, if you don't have any semolina left, that's okay, but you're simply gonna just roll it over and start to create a loaf out of it while taking out all of the air that you can. So you wanna just pull it out until you can take out all of the air, and it's gonna come into a nice loaf. You can do that by adding more semolina to it. If it starts sticking as well, you could also get some water. But the goal here is that you want to create a loaf with it. If you're just using parchment paper, you can create that loaf and leave it on the parchment paper. But let's say you want to take it off the parchment paper and you just want to do it. Let's get that away. A little bit of semolina again, and we're gonna work this dough on the counter, which will make it a lot easier. And you want to take as much air out as possible until you can get it into a loaf like this. And the more that you tuck it, the better it's going to help rise. So you want to be a little bit gentle with it, but you don't want to be just a little bit careless. So you really want to tuck it in and create a loaf pretty easily with the basket. You just put it right in the basket. Now you got a loaf, boom, put it right in the basket. And then all we're going to do is leave this overnight, and tomorrow morning we're gonna bake it, and I'll show you guys the process of baking it tomorrow morning, which is very simple to do as well. You could also do the loaf on your piece of parchment paper. You would just want to put it over top. What I did is I put it upside down in the basket. That's the same way you'd kind of do it in a bread pan, because I'm going to try and develop a crust on the top here. But on parchment paper, what you want to do is fold your loaf up to where it's on the parchment paper and the top is the top. So now you can cover that up and then you can do the baking process later as well. But you don't need to form that crust when you're doing a parchment paper. This is to help it not stick to any surface that I'm gonna put it on later on. I'm going to go ahead and let this rest now. What you do is all of these baskets come with a nice little kind of shower cap thing right here. And you're just gonna cover it up, and then this is gonna sit on the counter until tomorrow. What it's gonna do is gonna proof up more and fill the basket, and then I'm gonna be ready to cook it tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Okay guys, welcome back, and we're at the next morning and we're gonna start baking our bread. Process is pretty simple. So if you used a basket like this, if you were gonna bake it on parchment, you might wanna like have it covered on a pan and then have the parchment and basically already have everything on the pan, you know, have it covered up, and then you would take it off and put the pan in. This, I'm gonna use a piece of parchment to put it on. I have a baking stone in the oven here and I'm using that. You can still cook the bread on a pan. It just may or may not take a little bit longer. Realistically, I don't set an exact timer. I kind of just sit here and watch it. But typically you're talking about between the 15 and 20 to 25 minute range of cooking bread. It just depends. I like to watch it. Once I see kind of a nice color on it, that's when I'll take it out and I'll do the door knocking test, which basically on bread, it'll sound hollow in the middle when it's done baking. So you can actually pick it up and kind of knock on it. We have our basket. So if you have one of these, like I said, they're great. Just make sure you get some rice flour for it. That way it's easy for you to transfer it from the basket here to a tray or to like a piece of parchment. And basically I'm just using a piece of parchment today because it's a lot easier than trying to position it on the stone where I want it out of the basket. Plus you also have to, like with these, you want to cut it because it's such a large loaf, so it releases a little bit more of the air and also water content. So it makes a nice crusty bread on the outside, but soft in the middle. You don't have to do that if you're making smaller breads because they'll take less time to bake. But because this is 3 dough balls put together, that's why I'm doing that. So basically, I'm gonna put it here. It should come right out just like that. Realistically, this is kind of where you can become an artist. There is no right place to cut it, wrong place to cut it. So like, for example, just a simple cut down here is gonna leave some of this kind of fancy lines the box makes. And so, you know, you just want to cut it enough to where it'll open up and give a little bit of air in there. I preheated this oven at 550 degrees. It's been on for like an hour now. If you were doing this just on a sheet pan, you do need to preheat it to the heat. But the reason why I'm doing it for so long is because I have the stone in there. I want the stone to get hot. That way, when I transfer the bread to it, it's gonna cook the bottom and the top evenly. If you have a cold stone in there or a cold baking steel, what's going to happen is that it's going to be cold still, the top's going to be done, the bottom's still going to be soft. Important to just kind of think about those things. Also, if you have one of those bread pans, you could do the same process. You could also just cook it in the bread pan too. That works as well. So it all depends on just what you want to do. You can't cook it in one of these, but you can cook it the way I was telling you. So let's put this in and we'll check it out. And that's it. Pretty much what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna watch it here and I'm gonna let you guys see the video, and then we'll talk about the end product of that. We'll fast forward and get to the point where the bread's baked, and then I'll kind of show you it after it's done. And what I'm not going to do today, I'm not gonna cut into it. The reason why is you wanna let the bread rest a little bit and kind of get back to a place where it's going to have the air inside as well as the moisture. If you do cut it immediately, you're automatically starting the process of where the bread's gonna be harder to eat. It's gonna not be as flavorful and, you know, chewy for you. You always let your bread rest when you're done cooking it. Unless you're gonna immediately eat it right out of the oven, don't slice it. Let it rest, let it get back to a normal ambient room temperature, and then you could slice from there. Also, another thing I forgot about is you wanna put it on some kind of wire rack when you're done. So I'm gonna grab a wire rack and a sheet pan that I can put the bread on when it's done. That way I can show it to you guys. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is, since the bread has kind of puffed off of the parchment paper, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it, and I'm gonna remove the parchment paper, and then we can kind of cook it the rest of the way. All right, guys, I'm gonna pull this from the oven now, and let's see how it looks. And that's it. Now this thing is super, super hot, but I just wanted to show you guys it's cooked on the bottom pretty well, cooked on the top, nice and browned. I'm sure that some people that are big bread makers and things like that, they're gonna say, well, it didn't puff up as much, it didn't do this, it didn't do that. Realistically, bread recipes and also pizza dough recipes, while they're both breads, are gonna be a little bit different, so they're gonna act a little bit differently. And in some cases, this is probably a dough that I maybe let overproof a little bit too long, and in which case it's causing it to kind of just thin out like this. But all in all, it's going to still be a pretty amazing tasting bread and a great thing to do with pizza dough when you decide, okay, I've had 2 pizzas and 2 pizzas feels like enough for me. What else am I gonna do with the rest of this dough? Well, making some bread out of it and then being able to use it for toast or for sandwiches or for whatever. If you wanted to make bruschetta out of it, you're gonna still have an amazing tasting bread that you got to make from scratch yourself. Obviously, try this out at home. I'm sure that someone who's much better as a bread maker than me could make this look 10 times nicer. Realistically, I'm just kind of playing with those things and trying to incorporate things that I know that you can use. Going to make another video here shortly this week too about making a panozzo, which is a different type of bread that you can make with your pizza dough, and it's great to make kind of almost like a pita pocket sandwich, and it's very big in Italy, and I'm going to show you guys all how to do that as well. So stay tuned to the next episode, but for now, you know, here's a bread. It looks pretty awesome to me. Also, another thing I wanted to add in there is that it was about at 550 degrees. Like I said, I was using a stone, was on convection, and it maybe took about between 15 and 20 minutes to bake. So really not super long to do. You could obviously do it in a pizza oven, and that process may be a little bit shorter, might be the same amount of time. You know, there's several different ways to do it, but basically you can use your pizza dough, you can make a pretty amazing bread, and then you don't have extra additives to that bread, which is also nice as well. So thanks a lot.